We are your home theater and AV questions answered. This is AVRant. Want your home theater or AV question answered by Tom and Rob? Send it to question@avrant.com. Welcome to AVRant. I'm Tom Andry, and I'm here with
Rob H.
Infinite Gary. We have some pictures here. Did I open them? I don't remember opening them. I think a lot of times when I see Infinite Gary, I start to my eyes glaze over sometimes. But I mean, Gary, I mean that in the best possible way. I just
Yeah, it sounds fantastic when you say it.
I know. Sometimes these things sound better in my head. But what I mean is that there's just so much. There's like a little wall of text, and I have a hard time getting through it. Okay, so Gary's new bedroom Atmos setup consists of AVRant's SR6011. Remember, he's trying this out. He's decided he's going to try this out. Emotiva XPR5 amplifier, Revel front, center, and surround speakers, Klipsch up-firing Atmos modules, and an SVS PB12 Ultra subwoofer, and an Oppo UDP203 Ultra Blue HD Blu-ray player. All right, here we go. He'd like to get some things straight about Audyssey. Does he need to rerun it every time he makes a change? Like, if he wants to try using just the Marantz built-in amps versus the Emotiva, he needs to run Audyssey each time? That seems a little bit like a hassle. Only if there's... I can't see why that he would have to run it every time unless the Emotiva...
If you're changing your amps, you absolutely need to run
the volume,
again.
Right? The volume is what's going to make the biggest difference there.
No, but I mean, if you're going from using the built-in amps to using an external amp, you definitely need to run Audyssey again. For sure. Yeah, anytime you make a significant change to your room layout, if you move your speakers, you need to run it again. If you move your seat, you really need to run it again. If you move your subwoofers, you need to run it again.
I mean, if you're talking, you do. I don't know that I do every single time.
No, but I mean, he wants
by speaker a little bit. Yes, I understand what you're saying.
Yeah, he wants to try and critically listen and compare things. It's not fair to say, I'm going to run Audyssey once this way. I'm going to move a bunch of stuff, not rerun Audyssey and listen to it again and go, oh, I like the first one better. Like, of course you did. It was tuned to the way things were set up. So,
if you're going for critical listening, if you're just, like your speaker is an inch... That sound was not from this room. That was from outside this room. Somebody's moving chairs in the kitchen. That was not me. I swear. Okay. I know what that sounded like, Gary. That was not me. If I'm in my own home theater and my speaker just needs to be moved a little bit, I'm not rerunning Audyssey. But I mean, when I added 2 new speakers and the external amplifier for the... I mean, of course, it had to be really good. So SVS once told him that they prefer to have the volume dial on the subwoofer itself set higher, the trim level of the receiver set lower. But if he does that, Audyssey tells him his sub is too loud and won't even proceed, so what should he do? Well, you shouldn't listen to SVS, to start with. You got it. Okay. The idea behind this is that you want to have your subwoofer high enough. It goes both ways, but I think their idea is that if you keep the sub trim too low, it might not, the auto on and stuff might not activate.
And yet they're actually kind of saying the opposite of that. I've heard this advice from them too, like the volume dial on the subwoofer itself up fairly high and then turn the trim level down as necessary.
I think that's a terrible idea because you want I would rather have the volume level on the subwoofer low and the trim level high so that you get the highest possible signal coming out, the strongest signal coming out of the receiver. Therefore, the amplifier in the receiver, in the subwoofer will, it just will be able to see it. We'll be able to hear it. We'll be able to sense it. So it's a little weird. It's a little weird thing that they're saying there, and I would not do what they're saying.
Yeah, I've heard it has to do with like the efficiency of their amps and things like that, or that by having the trim level low, you're getting the least amount of noise coming out of your AV receiver, and then they trust their amps to amplify things more cleanly. But yeah, it's unnecessary in my opinion. In my opinion, you run Audyssey as Audyssey wants to run. That will on advanced AV receivers like the 6011 that will have you setting the volume dial before anything starts. It'll bring up the real-time volume graph on your television and tell you to adjust the volume dial until you're 75 dB plus or minus 3 dB. And you're right, it won't proceed until you do that. Right. Go ahead and run it that way. If you want to turn it up as high as it will allow you to go, which will be like plus 3 dB, that's fine if you really want to do it that way. But yeah, just proceed as Audyssey instructs, it will get you a perfectly reasonable result for your subwoofer.
Yeah, and when I added this external amp, which is what the hell is it, Rob?
The APA 100 from
That's
Dayton
it.
Audio.
The Dayton Audio one. It has volume on it. I was like, huh, volume.
Yeah, gain knobs.
Yeah, I don't like that. I just wanted it to be a straight up amplifier. So I was like, okay, well, you know what? I'll put the volume halfway. Because
Oh.
if I don't want to turn it all the way up because there might be some sort of hiss or something.
Yeah.
So, rather than be smart and turn it all the way up and put my stupid head next to the stupid speaker and see if there's a hiss,
Uh-huh.
I just turned it up 50% and was like, okay, I'll run Audyssey. So I ran Audyssey, and even through the door, I was like, this is not going well. Something is wrong in there, and I can clearly hear that something is wrong. It was plus 12 on the dial, and it was still super quiet. So it will let you go all the way through that way. So then I jacked up the volume knob, put my head next to the speaker. There was no noise coming out of it. Ran Audyssey again, and it just went just fine.
Yeah.
So, yeah. So, anyways, upon first running Audyssey, he identified his Atmos modules as top front and top rear speakers, set different crossover frequencies for each of his speakers, and set his front speakers to full band.
Mm-hmm.
What the heck is going on? Does he need to readjust a bunch of its settings manually? But what are they? What kind of? I know he's got Revel speakers. So are they bookshelves? They're bookshelves, right?
No, the fronts are towers.
Oh, okay.
So
Well,
seeing those ending up getting set as full band, not terribly surprising. And once again, it's not Audyssey actually doing that. Denon are the ones who decide what crossovers to set based on the Audyssey measurements, but they're the ones who decide. So full band for towers, not surprising. The crossover frequencies that were set, those themselves don't look bad at all, except for the fronts being set to full band. But yeah, the identification of the Atmos speakers as having been top front, top rear, that is user error if that comes up. During the setup wizard, because Marantz and Denon actually give you a setup wizard, and it's easy to make this mistake because you're going through it and it asks you, first of all, just how many speakers do you have total? So that's fine.
Right.
You say, all right, I have 9. In Gary's case, he has 5.1.4. So you say, I have 9 speakers total. That's fine. But then it asks you, how many overhead speakers do you have? And of course, Gary's like, I got 4. Well, if you're using the upward firing modules, you have to tell it you don't have any. You have to tell it, I have 0 overhead speakers. Then it will go and say, oh, how many Dolby speakers do you have? And then you tell it, I have 4 of those, because those aren't overhead speakers, those are upward firing speakers. So very easy to make that mistake. I certainly wouldn't begrudge anybody.
I would have done the same thing, Gary.
Of course, yeah. So we sorted that out in email.
But the crossovers and all that stuff, and sending things to full band, that is not unusual.
Very common.
This happens all the time.
Yeah.
And actually, his indignity of having to set stuff manually, it kind of surprises me because Gary's the kind of guy who likes to fiddle. So I think that this is a plus.
Then we slapped him on the wrist for doing it, and so did his installers. So I can
that was
see him.
fiddling with his projector settings. That's
right.
completely different. That is completely different. That's the difference between changing your seat setting in your car and then going into the little computer outlet down there and start fiddling with the BIOS of the car. One thing is perfectly fine, which is setting these crossover settings. The other thing, you need to know what you're doing, dude. And so this is fine. It will often do this.
Yeah.
I generally set everything to 80. That's what I do. I can't be bothered to sit there and try to mess with it. Though we're going to come across a question later on where I'm not going to suggest that. Except for my front height speakers where I let it set it whatever it wanted to say.
And in this case, so like it set his fronts to full band, you would manually change those to small, because right now it set them to large. You would change those to small, probably give him an 80 hertz crossover. Yeah. His surrounds, it gave them a 60 hertz crossover. I'd have no problem bumping that up to 80. Yep. Although leaving them at 60 probably isn't the end of the world either. But for his center and for what ends up being later on his Dolby front and Dolby surround upward firing speakers, it gave those a crossover frequency above 80 hertz. It gave his center a 90 hertz crossover. It gave his front Dolby speakers a 120 hertz crossover, his surround Dolby speakers a 110. I would personally leave those where they are. Anytime I see the crossovers set to a frequency above 80 hertz, and we're not talking like so far above 80 hertz that it's going to be a localizable problem, particularly for those Atmos upward firing modules. Those probably should have a higher crossover anyway. So if anytime I see something higher than 80 hertz, like 90 hertz for the center, I go, oh, that's probably fine. That's probably right. It's when I'm seeing full band, I definitely want to set them to small instead of large.
Right.
And if I'm seeing 60 hertz or 40 hertz or something like that, I'll move
And
that up to 80.
you can always mess around with this. I find that when I've made changes to these things and bumped them down to 80
Yep.
versus not, I didn't hear a difference really.
Yeah.
Not a real difference. Nothing I could ascertain from. So if you want to do a global, like I can't be bothered, I'm just changing globally everything to 80. Then just change everything to 80. I don't think it's going to be the end of the world, especially if they've set it to 90 or something. All right, he played an Atmos disc because Marantz says Atmos on his display, but his Oppo says Dolby True HD 7.1 on its display. Similar thing with the DTS-X. The Oppo always says DTS HDMA 7.1, never DTS-X. So that thinks maybe something is wrong? I
Nope.
mean, no, it's absolutely not wrong. It is sending out a Dolby True HD 7.1 or a DTS HDMA 7.1, and the Atmos information there is encoded. It doesn't know for sure whether or not your receiver or wherever you're sending this to can decode it. So this is the track it's sending. That's the one it's got. It also has Atmos data in there. And maybe if there was a longer display, it might say with Atmos afterwards. But it does. This is what it's doing. So your receiver says, "Hey, I'm getting Atmos." I'm just letting you know.
That's right.
I'm getting Atmos. So we're doing the Atmos thing. That's the thing that's happening right now, and that's great. So
Yeah, the
doing just right.
Oppo being a Blu-ray player or Ultra HD Blu-ray player, it does not have Atmos and DTS-X decoders built into it as a player. Doesn't
Why
have
would
that.
it need it? Yeah, it would absolutely not need it.
You really
Yeah.
couldn't. There's no real way to use that. So yeah, when you're getting Atmos on a Blu-ray or Ultra HD Blu-ray disc, it is in fact Dolby True HD with Atmos extensions added to it. So the Oppo says, I'm giving you Dolby True HD. I'm giving you that bitstream. The Marantz says, but I recognize it also has the Atmos extensions and shows Atmos right on the front panel. So go by what your Marantz says on its front panel. That's telling you the truth. Don't worry that the Oppo is telling you either of these. That is perfectly correct.
Okay. So his initial impressions are that he is not very impressed.
Yeah.
He says things sound very room-filling, but they're not as precise. He still prefers the way DTS Neo 6 and his old 3.1 setup sounded for two-channel content versus any of the upmixing modes available on the Marantz. And he actually thinks the sense of sounds coming directly overhead was more convincing in his 5.1 theater than it is in his room with his extra Atmos speakers. All of that being said, he's found the setup process a bit of a challenge. He's really not sure everything is actually placed, measured, and adjusted optimally. He judges based on listening to real-world content and comparing it to the way he heard it before. But maybe this new sound is actually more correct, even though he prefers the way it sounded previously. And how can he know for sure? There are so many settings and options, and you can just tweak things endlessly. Okay, I think when we first started this whole process and he started talking about this, I said that going with Atmos modules, upfiring modules, was never going to get Gary where he wanted to be anyways. Did I not say that?
You said something along those lines.
I'm
for sure.
fairly certain that I thought that the using the upfiring modules was not a good idea. And I think that this basically validates what I said. Because this bouncing of the sound, while it is nice, it is a compromise. And Gary is not about compromise. He never has been.
No.
None of his other theaters are about compromise. None of his other sound stuff he does is about compromise. And I honestly think that he setting correctly or not setting correctly, which we know he's got some settings that are a little bit off already because of how he went through the initial setup and how they label the speakers. I think that he should trust his ears on this one a little bit and say to himself, if he really wants to test the Atmos, just put some even if you just Velcro them up there for a day or two, just put some speakers on the ceiling and really test it rather than doing this, frankly, compromised version of Atmos.
So I ended up sending Gary at least one very long email. I think I sent a second one that was pretty long. I'm actually thinking maybe I'll try to make it less personalized to Gary and sort of edit it a bit and maybe post it as an article on avrant.com
be
because the thing I want to get away from a little bit, this isn't just for Gary, this is for everybody, this is a broader sense thing, is it is really important to make sure that you have optimized your setup, like at least according to all the standards that we know, right? That means you have your speakers physically placed the way Dolby wants you to have them placed. And in Gary's case, looking at the images that he sent, I'm like, those surround speakers and therefore the surround Dolby speakers that are on top of them, I'm like, those aren't actually where Dolby would have you place them. They're too far behind and too close. Now I can see why they're there, because in this room he's got, closet doors all over the place. He didn't want to block them, so he put the speakers where they physically fit. Right? But that's just one of those things where it's like, well, maybe that's a little bit of suboptimal placement. So what I basically wrote was sort of like a procedure of let's go through the check marks, right? Let's go through the checklist and make sure that we've done all these things in order, so that what we're not doing is saying, here's how I heard it before. I was using a different processor, different speakers, different speaker placement, and I got used to hearing a movie or some music this particular way. Now I set up this system, not necessarily even being sure that I have all the correct placement and settings and optimization, and I'm going to compare that to my memory of the previous sound, right?
Yeah.
To me, that's not a great way of deciding whether you're really there or not. Because one of the things that came up when I was talking with Gary, and this is really common, and even if you're reading a bunch of magazines or websites or that, this comes up a lot, which is that people attribute what they're hearing to, I swapped out this one product. Like in this case, Gary's using the same speakers and the same amplifier. He's changing processors from an Emotiva 5.1 processor to this new Marantz doing the processing. And they're saying, I preferred the sound with the previous processor. And I'm like, that is too many variables being attributed to one thing, right? Even if, like, first of all, there's different room correction. They have different target curves. If you're using the room correction, you're definitely going to have differences. They're purposely giving the amplifier a different signal because they have different target curves. But people will sometimes, especially audiophiles, will say, well, that's why I don't use room correction. I turn off the room correction, and all I changed was the processor. I'm like, but the processor contains within it a whole bunch of variables, right? You could have different filters in the crossover. Some are steeper than others, and you might not necessarily be able to manually change that. Sometimes you're using FIR filters versus IIR filters, right? Which means the timing involved in that filter could be different. Some of them have a little bit more gain on their pre-outs than others, right? Like all of these variables, you might happen upon a combination of all these variables that you prefer, but to say that means brand X is better than brand Y, it becomes far too large and far too generalized a statement, right?
And he's also making statements like that he thinks that the overhead stuff was more convincing in his 5.1 theater downstairs compared to his untreated bedroom upstairs.
Well, that's also sometimes using the upmixing, which is like, it's an algorithm. It's guessing, right? Like you heard a sound in Master and Commander or the others or something, and that was a 5.1 mix. That was the soundtrack. It was not an Atmos soundtrack. It's a 5.1 soundtrack. You played it in 5.1. It gave you a convincing sound of something overhead. You then use the Atmos upmixer, and you're like, it doesn't sound as overhead anymore, but it wasn't mixed in actual Atmos. It's an algorithm trying to extract overhead information. It's like, yeah, sometimes that happens. Sometimes the upmixing algorithm doesn't do as good a job as the native mix played the way that it was played when they were mixing the darn thing, right? So
and now that
there's a lot of variables at play.
Finally remembered to open the pictures and look at them. I see what you're talking about, because I was like, how does he know what the crossovers are? I'm like, oh, because he's got a picture of the crossovers.
That's right.
But if you look at you can see it in the image of the crossovers. You can see that that where the speaker is placed in the image of the crossover versus where the surround speaker is placed in his room. Clearly not the same place. So on top of all the other stuff we're saying here is, if you really want to give this thing a chance in this room, yes, okay, we know you can't leave it this way, but you need to try to set it up the way it's supposed to be set up. That means pulling the bed off the wall for a little bit, putting the speaker way over to that side, taking another speaker, put it way over to the other side, and give that Atmos module a way of bouncing that thing to you the distance that it needs to go. I mean, it needs to go a lot longer than, what is that, like 3 feet? Maybe less? Maybe between
it's
you
really
and your chair?
tight. And Dolby would say, ideally you'd have 5 feet or more distance.
Yeah.
3 is the bare minimum, they'll say, but it looks like you're right at that bare minimum.
Yeah, you got to get further away than that. So there's definitely some of that, but I do believe, Gary, that that trying to use the Atmos modules, if you're not going to set them up absolutely optimally, which is, I swear I said this before, if you're not going to set them up absolutely the way they're supposed to, do not expect anything that you're going to be impressed with. I just can't see it happening, and this is why. It's because there's just too many things that are going on that you're trying to do. Now the front speakers look okay, and you're sitting right between them, so everything looks okay up there. But those surround speakers need to be fixed, and you got to make sure that you're giving yourself 5 feet around these speakers, at least, if not more, so that the sound can bounce up off the ceiling and back down. That's assuming you have an 8-foot ceiling. What if you don't? What if he's got like 10 feet in there? It's got to be even further away. So, you know. Anyways, you don't have to tweak things endlessly. You do have to set things up the way that they're supposed to be set up.
Right.
You do have to. That is non-optimal.
And that still doesn't mean that will ultimately be the sound that you prefer.
Yes.
On a personal level.
Right.
But we want to start at the baseline of, okay, at least we know we're starting with everything set up the way it's supposed to be set up according to all the guidelines and standards. Let's get used to that, and then we can start tweaking to taste. Right?
That's right.
But we need a baseline to start from.
You don't get a new couch and stand on it and say, I don't like the way this couch feels. You know, you wouldn't do that. You would sit on the couch. You would get yourself comfortable on the couch. You would get yourself in the position that you might watch TV on the couch. And then you would say how you felt about its comfortability or how comfortable it is. What you do not do with speakers is set them, put all 5 of your speakers to the front of your room, start playing a movie and say, that doesn't sound good at all. I'm taking these things back. They're clearly defective. I like my old setup with 2.1 or my great setup that I have professionally calibrated in a completely different room better. Well, of course you do.
I will say, though, I do think it's perfectly fair for anyone to go, I bought this product. I basically set it up out of the box.
Yes.
I bought this other product, basically set it up out of the box,
yes.
and I preferred one over the other, and I don't want to mess with all the super fiddly little, settings that I could possibly delve into. I found one that out of the box I liked more. I'm like, I am fine with that, because you shouldn't have to be an engineer to enjoy audio. That's not a fair requirement.
And if this was Gary's room, like this was Gary's room, and this is where Gary could put his speakers, and this is where these speakers would stay, and he said, I don't like Atmos, I'd say you should send those Atmos speakers back and just enjoy your 5.1.
Yeah.
But that's not what he's doing. What he's doing is I want to test out Atmos, so I'm setting up in a room that I can set it up in. Well, then you don't need them to not block the doors or the bed forever. You just need them to be in the proper position for long enough for you to experience it, and then you can put them wherever the heck you want after that.
Yeah.
Yes, it means that you'll have to run an Audyssey when you move them, or you can do what I do and have a real good idea of where they were, and then put them back there every single time, and just go with that. Want your question answered? Send it to question@avrant.com. This is AVRant.
Now go out and listen to something.